as I said in the class description, we're going into depth in all kinds of things. So far, what we've covered, we started this class already, I think toward the end of 2020, and we went through Siman Lamed, most of Siman Lamed Bet in the tour, actually. So that's from Hilchot Tefillin, and that covers the basic halach of most aspects of writing. We got up to when we were getting into the matters about the batim and how parshiot into the batim and so forth. Not everyone, but seemed like most of the students were not interested in that, so I left that for the time being, and I came over now to Yored. We're in Hilchot Sefer Torah, and as I said, we're focusing now on Isur Mechikat Hashem. So those of you who are just joining me now, we've been learning this now for a while. And we're kind of in a sense, we're sort of in the middle, but not entirely. And but you'll follow and see how you like it. So I'm going to put up a text on the screen. Hold on one moment. Actually, I can send everybody the text that I'm using. I have to remember where I put it, just a sec. But you'll be able to see it on the screen in any event. Wait a second. Do you know what? I apologize. I'm not going to take the time right now to send it. Just follow with me on the screen, which is what I usually do. But I remember I said last time that I would send everybody the text. Let me find it. Okay. All right. So here we are. We're in the tour. We're actually in the middle of the Beit Yosef. And his commentary on the tour. So just to clarify, the tour was essentially the forerunner of Shulchan Aruch. It was written by Rabbeinu Yaakov, who was the son of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher. And Yosef Karo, when he was trying to write a comprehensive summary, the medieval rabbis, this people that we now call Rishonim, he was going to create an entirely new work, but he saw it had already been published, and he decided that the tour does a lot of the groundwork. So what he did is he appended his commentary and his expansions on the tour. And then later on, he took the conclusions from the Beit Yosef and he used that as a basis to write the Shulchan, where he left out the vast majority of his comments and the vast majority of his analysis and just gave Piskei Dinim. So here we are now. We're on this part of the tour It says Devak be'otiot Hashem yesh lo legororo. So if there's a connection, right? If two letters are touching, the sofer should erase the connection. He doesn't have to afterwards take a pen and go over it with new ink and sanctify it. Because it's already written halachic with Kedushat Hashem, with the holiness of Hashem. Yeah, in other words, he made the declaration that he's writing the Shem Kedushat Hashem. The letters now are not halachically correct. So when he fixes the letters, now the Shem is written according to halacha. So we discussed this. Basically what the Tur is saying is somebody wrote, the case that he's bringing is somebody who wrote Shem Hashem, right, to say Sefer Torah. And it turned out that after he finished writing it, a couple of the letters stuck to each other. So we know from our earlier studies that no two letters are allowed to touch one another, right? They need hakafat gvil, and if they don't have hakafat gvil, you have to fix it. So he's saying that if letters in the Shem Hashem are touching, then you fix it essentially like any other kind of touching letters, right? He should erase the point where it's touching, and that'll be fine. And he doesn't, since the Shem Hashem was written properly in aspects, it already has Kedushat Hashem. So what it's missing is the hakafat gvil. So when he erases between the letters, it now has hakafat gvil. So that's sufficient. That's fine. Now, what we discussed the last couple of weeks actually breaks down into two possible scenarios. And the way the Tur brings it, he doesn't seem to differentiate, because he just brings this as a forward case, right? That at any time two letters are touching, even in the Shem Hashem, you erase. But the two possible scenarios are either at the time when the sofer was written, he accidentally connected one letter to another, or he wrote him entirely prop with all the letters all the letters were mukafot gvil, right? Had space between them, but after he wrote it, some ink fell, and ink fell on the letters, and it connected two letters. Those are two possible scenarios here. And what we saw earlier is that there's an argument to say that when we're allowed to erase between the letters in the second scenario, when the ink fell and connected the letters, and not in the first scenario, because in the first scenario, wait a second, before I say one, those of you who were here in the earlier shiurim, what's the svara to say that you can erase it after the ink, when the ink fell, but not in the case where the letters were touching milachatchila? Why would I say that it's okay to erase it when the ink fell and not in the first case?
Initially, it was kosher.
Very good. So Shlomo, who wasn't here, you cannot, right? You make the argument that in the case where the ink fell, then the Shem Hashem had a shat kosher. There was a time when it was entirely kosher, and now the only problem is that after the fact, the letters are now touching. So you take care of that by erasing between the touching. But in the case where the Sofer wrote lechatchila and the letters were touching, so never kosher. It was never kosher, and therefore separating them now is not going to help. So we digressed on this somewhat in the Beit Yosef, right? It's idea that you wouldn't be allowed to do it in the case where the letters were touching at the time of writing seems to go according to the opinion of the Rashba, who we learned way back when we were learning Siman. The Rashba holds that if you wrote a letter and then you wrote a second letter to it, and before you finished the second letter, it touched the first letter, that second letter, even the partial letter, even finished, is entirely pasul. You have to erase everything. So we don't hold like that the halacha, and it would seem that the Rosh, that the Tur also doesn't, right? Because the Tur doesn't go out of his way to distinguish between these two cases. But we did see that there's a svara that's brought down in the name of the Ri from the Mordechai who holds like that. But what we saw in terms of that is that the Beit Yosef himself says that that we can rely on the Rosh, right? The two asking like the Rosh, his father, and the Rosh held Venkach uvenkach, you can erase between the letters. So that's a summary of what we've done so far. And then last time, we started looking further on here in the Beit Yosef, and we started reading a quote that he brings from the Riyas Gandarni. So that's what we're up to now. We actually got a little bit further, but I'm going to start from the beginning of the Riyas Gandarni. So Zel Lashon HaRiyas Gandarni, Zichrono Livracha, B'Torah Chaim Siman Lamed Bet. Pshit ki mi shenitkaven. I'm sorry, 1 second. It's you're going to find it. 1 second. He says, Pshita kimishin itkaven lichtov haem, denidbeka lo regel smolit shel hei rishona shebeshem ben dalid bigaga binyan shenikar lechol shehi chet v'dai yachol hu ror regel hachet shnasa bebisul ve'en ze over mishum hadetanya hamocheko tochat min Hashem over belo tasei. אמר רבי ישמעאל כך נאמר ואיבדתם את שמנו תעשון כהנה השם אלוקיכם אבל אם נשפכה דיו על השם מותר למוחקו שלא הייתה כוונתו אלא לתקן. All right, so let's just quickly explain this. He starts off by saying it's obvious that somebody who intended to write Shem Hashem, and now he's going to talk about a case that a specific case which actually we brought up a little bit earlier as well. He's going to talk about it now. Not that two letters touched one another, but that the regel of the left regel of the head touched the roof of, and specifically because regel smolit shel hei rishona shem Hashem. So what happens if he's writing Shem Hashem Yud Hey Vav Hey? He wrote the Yud and he wrote the Hey, but he made a mistake writing the Hey, and now the regel smoli is touching the gag of the Hey. And now, the case that we're talking about, binyan shenikar lechol, anyone who looks at it will say this is a chet. She says, in that case, v'day yachol hu ligror regel echet. There, he can certainly erase the regel of the chet, shenasa b'pisul, because that was made improper. It was made pasul to begin with. So in other words, at this point, he's written the Yud. He said L'Shem Kedushat Hashem, and he wrote the Yud. But after that Yud, he wrote a Chet. So the Chet is obviously not part of the Shem Hashem. So obviously he can fix that by erasing the regel of this Chet. The Ein Za'over transgress the Isur of Chikat Hashem, of Ibadatam et Shemam, Lotas, which we'll see in a second. And he says, and he brings a proof from this Braita, which is in Masechet Sofrim. It says, Hamochek ot achad min Hashem over below taseh. If you erase even one letter from them, you've transgressed a lo taseh, right? A negative commandment. And Amar Rabbi Yishmael and Lekach Ne'amar. Actually, we have Rabbi Shimon, but it doesn't matter. And the pasuk lo tasun ken l'shem lokechem, right? So that's that pasuk. Those psukim are the makor for the isur of mechikat Hashem, right? You have to destroy the name of avodah zarah, and you're not allowed to do that to the Lord your God. Aval im nishpecha dio al Hashem, but if dio fell on the Shem Hashem, mutar lemochko, you're allowed to erase. Because his intention here is only to repair, and we'll go a little bit more as we continue. Hareinit Bayer, the Riyas Kandani says. So now it's explained from this Braita, Shim nifsedat surat ot ve'otiot Hashem al yedei shfichat she'achol mochka. Right. So I understand from this Braita that if one of the letters of Shem Hashem lost its form by having ink spill on it, he can erase that. All the more so, in our particular case, he made a hey into a chet, because to begin with, that chet is pasul. But lo zu bilvad, not only this, elafilu nidbat lo ki hai gavna. Hey, he says in this case where it's the first hey, and like we said, if it happens, so what he's erasing is definitely not Shem Hashem as a Yud and a Chet. But even if the hey got stuck in this way, hey, what if the second got stuck? V'nasit Chet. Im heyot shnitkadesh Hashem b'chishon shiachol takna. Right. So even in this case, where the first half of this Shem Hashem is kadosh, because he wrote a kosher Yud, Hey, and Vav, so Afal Picha, and then you might say, now this is Od Yoter Chamur, because now I'm erasing some that is attached to a Shem Kadosh, whereas when I erased the first Hey, it wasn't a Hey, it was a Chet, and there was no Shem Kadosh. But now I'm erasing something further on. Maybe you'll argue here you wouldn't be allowed. So he says, no, nonetheless, the same holds true for the second Hey, if the second Hey was made to look like a Chet. So that's what we got up to last time. Bram, Akatni Bai. Dechad Hey Neotiot Hashem Lo Tale Krai Kidika Yaut. Yaut, Kagon de Davik Begage Kechut Sahara. Le Alma Karule Hey. Hey Chiliabi. See, now he brings up a different possibility. What if you can still ask this question? What if one of the Hays from Shem Hashem, he didn't hang the left leg as is proper, as is nice? And what do I mean? That the nikuda, the left leg of the hay, to the roof by a very thin line, a line that's just as thin as a hair. And anyone who looks at it, thinks it's a hay, right? So until now, we've been discussing a case where the regel of the hay got stuck to the roof and it looked like a chet. And now we're talking about a different case. What if the regel, when it stuck to the to the roof of the hay, it still looks like a hay? So I made a crude drawing last time, and I will make a crude drawing this time just to make sure we all are on the same page. So in the first case, we have a hay. And what we did for this theoretical sofer did, he extended this leg all the way up to the roof. So now it looks just like a chet. There's no question here that you're allowed to erase this leg and rewrite it. And I'll just point out, which I think I mentioned before, and you probably are aware, that if that is in fact the case, you have to erase that chet is by erasing it from the bottom up, right? Because if you start to erase it from the top down, what's the problem if I erase from the top down?
If you go on, sorry.
Yeah.
Chak tochot. You're creating a letter by erasing.
Right. So you give it, and then what's the problem?
Then you have a hey, and you were already Mikadosh Shem Hashem, and now you can't erase it.
Right. Exactly. In other words, so if it was just any other hay, it wouldn't matter. You would just erase the whole leg. It wouldn't matter if you're starting from the bottom or starting from the top. But if you're starting from the top in Shem Hashem, the moment you erase the connection, hey, but it's Shem Hashem, so you can't continue erasing. But it's pasul, says because of Chak Tochot. All right, so that's something just to bear in mind. All right, the second case, which is the case that we're talking about now, is a case that's like this. Oh, that's interesting. Hold on. Okay, and this hay, let's say we made it more like the way we make a hay now in Ashkenazi Ktav, where we make not a straight line going down like in a Sephardi Ktav, but we make a hay by making a nekuda that looks like a yud, like an upside down yud. And when we were making it, we extended it so it connects by a very thin line. So he says, "Hey chili avid." In this second case, how should we do it? Di garir lahahu dvak. So now this is very clear. If I erase the point of connection, just like we said a moment ago, it's chak tochot, and so it'll look like a kosher hay, but we'll know that it's not kosher because it's chak tochot. If he leaves it the way it is, in other words, he doesn't do anything to it. He just leaves it with the connection. Because you'll say, okay, it looks like a hay, it's not the best, but I can leave it. He says, no, but it's not so simple because he here we say in the Gemara and Menachot and Hakom, it's my time. What's the reason that we hang the left leg? We hang the leg of the hay. And we all know this Gemara. The Gemara there, the Gemara there is in the middle of a drasha. It's asking the question, why is it that this leg of the hay is hanging, meaning that it's not connected? It's very explicit that it's not connected. So there we understand from the Gemara that left leg should not be connected even by a hair's breadth. Tshuva mimasha katav horosh. So the Rebbe goes on to answer, says, I answer based on what the Rosh wrote in his Halachot Ktanot and Hilchot Sefer Torah, and he writes, "Inagu regel aheva kuf begagehem psulin." Right. So he flat out that if the regel of the hair, the kuf, touch their roofs, then they're both pasul. Uvitfilin ein lo takana. Right, and if you find such a thing in tefillin, then there's no way to fix it. Right? Because of the problem with Kasidran, you can't do anything about it, and they're pasul, you can't fix it. And based on what we learn in Perak HaBoneh and Masachet Shabbat, כגון שנטלו לגגו של חטא ויעשהו שני זין, או כגון שנטלו של דלת ויעשהו ריש. One second. This Gemara, I think we did this in class. Just a sec. One second. Is everybody familiar with this Gemara? Or I should say, is anybody familiar? Did you learn this Gemara? Do you know what he's talking about? It's okay if you didn't.
No, I don't.
Okay. Let's take a moment. I'll share and I'm sorry, when I remember when I prepared last week, I had this Gemara ready to go. and I didn't do it for this week, so just give me a second and I'll bring it up. Okay. Yeah, okay, you can all see that. So this Gemara, a long time ago, we learned part of this Gemara. So this is Gemara in Masachet Shabbat that talks about the Isur of Ketiva on Shabbat. It lays out for us some of the basic halachot of Ketiva on Shabbat. And so the Mishnah says, right? So the basic Isur of writing letters on Shabbat is if 2 letters behad in one state of unconsciousness, like you weren't conscious either that it was Shabbat or you weren't conscious that writing on Shabbat is asur, then you're chayav to bring a korban chatat. And then it brings other conditions. Katav b'dio b'sam b'sikra b'kolmus b'kankamtum u'b'chol davar shehu roshem. If he wrote with ink or any of these other substances which were used for writing, anything that makes a mark, or al shnei aviyot, or if he wrote on 2 at the corner where 2 walls meet, one on one wall and one on the one letter on one wall, one letter on the other wall. The pinkas, the 2 tablets in a pinkas that they used to use for recording things, and they were next to each other. In all these cases, he's chayav. Hakotev al besaro chayav. If you write on your skin, you're chayav. Mesaret al besaro Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chachamim potri. If you scratch into your flesh, Rabbi Eliezer says you're chayav. Chachamim say you're patur. Katav b'mashkin b'mei perot b'avak drachim b'avak hasofrim v'chol davar she'eino mitkayem patur. If you wrote with liquids, like if you took water and you wrote with it on paper, let's say, or mei perot, or you wrote with juice, or you made in the dust on the ground, bavaka sofrim, of anything that's not made to last, right? That's going to go away. Then from the Torah, you're patur. But midurabanan, it's still asur. Right? The Mishnah doesn't say it, but patur throughout Masechet Shabbat is always understood. The Gemara says that it's patur aval asur, except in I think 3 places, and this is not one of them. Liachar yado b'raglo b'fiv u'mariko. If you wrote in literally on the back of the hand, in other words, if you wrote in an conventional way. Let's say you wrote with your leg or with your mouth or with your elbow. Katav otachat samuch l'ktav. The katav, right, letter near other something that was already written. The katav al gabei ktav. Or if you wrote letters on top of letters that were already written before. And here, this is the part we wanted to get up to. Nitkaven lichtov chet. You went to write a single letter, a chet. Katav shnei zayinim. But you ended up writing 2 zayinim. Achat ba'at ba'aretz v'chat b'koreh, one letter on the ground, one letter on the ceiling board. Katav al beit kotlei habayit al shnei dapei pinkas ve'ein ne'agin zeim ze patur. In 2 places where you won't be able to read the 2 letters one next to the other. Your patur, katav otachat notrikon, Rabbi Yeshuv and B'ter b'chayim v'chachamim potrim. If you wrote one letter that stands for many letters, like we do quite often in Hebrew, where we'll have like a single letter, like resh and a little chupchik means like Rebbe, Rabbeinu, right? So you're writing a single letter that stands for many letters. That's a machloket tanaim. So this particular part here, this is what interests us. It says, "Nitkaven v'katav shnei zayinim." He had it in mind to write a chet, but he wrote 2 zayinim. So Rashi says, "Nitkaven lichtov chet v'dileg hakulmus v'lo nira hagag shel chet el shnei haregalim v'nireh k'shnei zayinim." So he was writing, and when he would, according to Rashi, as I'm sure you all know, when you make the chet, you make the roof of the chet. So Rashi offers this idea that what the Mishnah is talking about is somebody he maybe wrote 2 legs, and then he was making the roof that was going to connect them, but his pen skipped, and there's an empty space in the middle of the roof. So now it looks like he wrote 2 zayins. Okay. Later on here, Gemara brings a braita here at the end of the daf, and this is what the Rosh is referring to. Tana braita, higia otachat chayav. If he corrected 1 letter, he's chayav. In other words, correcting a letter that he wrote, he's chayav for ktiva on Shabbat. So now the Gemara wants to understand, so what's that case? How can he be chayav for correcting 1 letter? Ashta katav otachat patur. We understand from the, if he only wrote 1 letter, he would still be patur. So how could it be if he corrects 1 letter that he's chayav? right? Hashta katav ot echad patur higia ot echad chayav, right? How could he be chayav if he writes just one? If he corrects one letter? Amarav shek b'maya skinan. So what's the case that we're working with here? Kagon nitalo legago shalchet yasau shnei zayini. So we're talking about a case where he removed the roof of the chet and he made it into two zayins. And Rava Amar kagon shenatalo letago shel dalit yasau resh. Rava says it's talking about a case where he removed the tag of the dalid and he made it into a resh. So we'll make another crude couple of drawings. Right, so in the case of the chet, I'll just make sticks here. He wrote the chet. I'm going to connect these for the moment. He wrote a chet like that, and he removed from the gag. This is the way Rashi would understand it, right? That he removed this and this, and he was left with two zayins. This is the machloka between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam about the chet. So Rabbeinu Tam understands this a little differently. He understands that to begin with, he had a chet like this that had a little roof on top, and what he removed was this part here, right? He removes the roof part, the top part. And what's the other case? The other case is of one second. Here we go. He had a dollar. So, and it says that he removes the tag of the dalid. What he means is he means this part here, the part that extends the leg of the dalid. That's the dalid. The top right is what he means by the tag. So if you remove of the dalid, it'll look like a resh. Again, you'll pardon my crude drawing, but that's what he's talking about.
Michelle?
Yeah.
So when we're referring to the tag, you're referring to the extension of the gag as being a tag, because I thought the tag was just the kind of like the okets that came off of the top. So what are you referring to as the tag?
Yeah, so exactly that, and that's why I'm pointing out to you. So in the vast majority of the places where we see the term tag, we think of it as like either a serif, right? And there are different words that you see in the Rishonim. You can see tag, you can see kots, okets, and that's usually referring to a crown or a serif. But here, the tag of the dalid as it's understood here in the Gemara, is referring to the right side of the Dalet. And in order to understand that a little bit better, if you look at ancient scripts, right, which are not as polished and as defined as the ones that we're used to, again, this is, it would be, you would see a Dalet that might look more like this, maybe even a thinner roof, right, where there's just a little bit of something sticking over on the right. If you look at some of the ancient, what you see, it's not even that. Look at some of the ancient scripts. What you see is up here on the top right, they're sticking out there. Like you'll see something sticking out there, and this comes basically. And so if I remove this last part, it'll look like a resh, right? So this is also general when you're learning any of these thing that was written essentially up until certainly the 19th century, but in some way really up until like the last half of the 20th century. Don't assume that the Tzurat Ot is that they're talking about, right? In any given place, the Tzurot Otiyot were, varied. And so it's one of the problems with a lot of the Sfarim that have come out in the last 30 years is they use for Dugma'ot, they're using a Ktav that people have only been writing for us, and then it's a little bit hard to understand. Anyway, so now all of you might be saying, okay, but in both of these cases, the Chet and the Dalid that become two Zions or become a Resh, but it's Chak Tochot. But what you see is that's going to be considered for the purpose of Isur K'tiva and Shabbat. That will be considered K'tiva, even if it's Pasul for a Sefer Torah. We're learning this in. We're learning in the context of what is and isn't acceptable for what is or isn't make somebody chayav on Shabbat. Just a sec. I want to just a second. Get out of that and come back here. Okay, so with that little sidetrack, let's go back and understand what the Rosh is saying. So remember, our question is, what happens if you have a hay in either the first hay or the second hay, and the regel smoli touches the roof of the hay by a thin line, and now I see it's a hay. So how can I fix it? So that's the question of the Rias Gandarni. So he says, okay, I see from the Rosh says stam, that anytime the hay or the kuf, the regel of the hay or the kuf touch the gag, it can't be fixed, right? It's pasul and it's tefillin and can't be fixed. As long as they from what we see in the Gemara that we just learned, in the case of where somebody removed the of the chet and made it into two zions, what do we learn from that? Lamanu shahamochek miktzat ot ad shehotzi mitmunata harishona v'asa'aret nikra magia. Somebody who erases part of a letter until he's, by virtue of the erasure, he has now removed it from its original tmuna, right, from its original form, And by this erasure, he has now made it into another letter. So he's called magia in this context. Uki'ilu machak kol ot rishona. In other words, what's important for us to learn from this Gemara in Masechet Shabbat is that by taking away some essential part of the letter and I make it into another letter or letters, it's as if I've erased the original letter. It's as if I've erased the original whole letter. This would also be the same din for somebody who erases the regel of the entire the entire regel of the king until the hay look like a dalid. He will now be called somebody who has erased a single letter from the shame. He'll be chayav for isur mechikat Hashem from the time that he erased. In other words, this was a lot of trouble that the Rosh went to something that may be obvious to all of us, but remember, these are things that have to be fleshed out. We have to have makorot for them. What did we see in the Braita from Masechet Sofrim? It says if you erase one letter from Shem Hashem, that you're chayav. You can say, okay, what if I erase part of a letter? Maybe I'm not chayav. That would be a reasonable assumption, a reasonable implication. So what the Rosh is proving is that if you erase part of a letter to the extent that it now loses its identity as you're erasing, even if you don't all the parts of it, you have effectively the whole letter. And for that, you'll be chayav from the chikat Hashem. So that was this whole thing that he did, that to understand from the Gemara and Masechet Shabbat, that's the proof from the Gemara and Masechet Shabbat. If you erase part of a letter and turn it into another letter, it's as if you have erased the whole letter. And therefore, you're going to be chayav in the case, if it's from the Shem Hashem, you'll be chayav from the chikat Hashem. It goes on to say, and now that he's going to be chayav for having erased this part of the hay, what's the practical difference if he goes later? In other words, he's not going to accomplish anything. In other words, we don't let the sofer be over on Mechikat Hashem, even if his intention is to fix it later. Because at the moment the moment that he changed it into another letter, he'll be chayav mechikah from this on. Lo dami l'tipat yosh nafla al Hashem o mikzato damrinin la'el shechol limchok u'letaken daham batla tzurata ot v'alken yachol legarara. He says, and this is not like the case where the ink fell on the letter afterwards, that earlier we said, in other words, the Rosh earlier in his halachot, that you're allowed to even fix it, because there, the whole form of the letter was voided by the yo that fell, and therefore he's erase it. In other words, what we see is, unlike the earlier right? We talked about this last week. When we learn this Braita in Masechet Sofrim, the Braita is not so clear because it says, Hashem mutar l'mochko. So until now, earlier when we were learning it from, we had this idea, when I gave you the introduction earlier, we have this idea from early Rishonim, from last week, from the Ri and the Mordechai and so forth, that's talking about, that the Masechet Sofrim is talking about where a little bit of dio fell and it connected two letters. But I could still see which letter was which. The Rosh understands it differently. He understands that the case that the bright is on is where ink fell on and it obliterated the letter. I can no longer tell that it's a letter. And that's why, according to him, that's why the Breita says you're allowed to fix it, because the letter that was there to begin with is there no longer, right? It's already, as it were, erased. Even though you didn't purposely erase it, ink fell on it, now it's erased. So he says, that's why the Breita says, that's the way he understands it. There you're allowed to fix it because your kavanah is to be mitaken, and what you're being mitaken is a letter that has already been lost. But here, the Rias Gamdarni is saying, here, everybody who's looking at this hay, where they connected by a thin line, right? The regel is connected by a thin line. Everybody sees it's a hay. But it has this psul that it's connected to its roof, and that's a technical psul, meaning we're going to differentiate between being the legibility of the letter. It's still legible as a hay. Everyone who looks at it thinks it's a hay. Halachically, it's not kosher as a hay because of the Gemara Menachot that says that emphasizes this idea that the hay that the leg of the hay, the kara of the hay, has to be hanging and meaning not touching. So therefore, what? After all that, according to this, you would not be allowed to fix this hay. There's no way to fix this hay in the Shem Hashem. B'perek HaKometz, Rami bar Timri Yifsika le'vav devayaharog b'nukva. Right, so this is a Gemara that we learned a long time ago in Gemara Masechet Brachot in Masechet Menachot. It's the classic case that the Gemara brings where you learn the din of Shelat Tinok. You'll see in a moment what he wants to learn from it. So the case there is a case where there was the vav in the word Vayaharog in Tefillin was interrupted, and he says Mehashma Inan. So we learn from that the begreirat ktsat ot ad shenishtana al yedei oto chisaron laot acheret shenechkav kemechikat ot shalem. In other words, there the question is this: you had a vav, and then it was hufsak al yedei chor, and the Gemara there wants to know: is it I'm not sure if it's a vav or a yud. The answer is you ask a tinok. But what it means is, okay, outside that now it's no longer a vav. What he's saying, he's emphasizing this, that again, if you take part of a letter to the extent that it loses its identity, it will have erased the entire letter. This will apply also to somebody who erases the regel of the hay, machsira ledalid, and turns it back, machsira dalid, makes it back into a dalid. The same thing, if you erase the regel of this hay that's touched to the roof, you've turned it back into a dalid. It's as if you have erased that whole hay, and therefore, as we mentioned, you'll be chayav for isur mechikat Hashem. The lekala meimar dechol mechikashi hi letikun sharia. So you can't say that any kind of erasure where you're erasing in order to fix something that should be. And maybe you'll bring from the mizbeach. The hanotetz even mea mizbeach lo michayev el b'oseh derech hashchata. We actually in the Gemara, so we know there's in the Torah that you're not, you're not allowed to destroy any part of the mizbech, and you're not even allowed to right? You can't bring it into contact with metal, with iron. So, but what about im nifkema shetzarich letaken acheret bimkoma shari? But if one of the stones of the mizbeach got chipped in such a way that you would have to replace it, then you would be allowed to. In other words, there's an exception in the case of the mizbeach. And by the way, the case of the mizbeach is also under the same isur of lo tasum ken l'shem elokechem. It's based on the same isur as mechikat Hashem. They have the same proof text. And so you'll say, look, I'm allowed to, in the case of a mizbeach in the Beit HaMikdash, and one of the stones is nifgam. So I'm allowed to remove it and put in another one, right? In other words, what I'm doing, in other words, I have to destroy mizbeach in order to rebuild it. So, and we actually have a proof from history. Shekain matzina b'nei Chashmonai shenatzu mizbeach shebana Ezra shetimu yivanim kediyita b'yoma. Right? So there's a Gemara in Yoma which refers to this idea, and you can see it yoter b'harchava in Sefer Chashmonaim, that when the Chashmonaim back to purify the temple, so they had to rebuild the mizbeach, because the mizbeach had been used by the Yevanim for sacrifices of avodah zarah. So the whole mizbeach was pasul, and so what they chopped it down, they took it apart, and they built another one. And so I see that though there's an isur of destroying the mizbeach, but in the case where I'm destroying it in order to build a new one, that it's permitted. So you should say that's the same thing here for Mechikat Hashem. If I'm going to erase the Shem Hashem in order to rewrite it, it should be permitted. So he says, the Hatam Shan, there it's different. The EF Sharlan and below Mizbeach. First of all, if you have a Beit HaMikdash, you can't have a Beit HaMikdash without a Mizbeach. We also don't have the option of leaving the pasul mizbeach in its place and making another mizbeach elsewhere in the mikdash, in the azara. And if you look at the sugya there on Daf Tetzayin Amud Aleph in Yoma, one of the discussions of exactly where the placement of the mizbeach was, and it's something that was very precise. So I don't have the option I don't have the option of building another one. I don't have the option of making another one in place. Here I do have an option. I can remove the sheet where there's a psul in the Shem Hashem. I can just remove the entire sheet. I have the option. And I think we mentioned this tshuva, the Rambam earlier. It's a short tshuva. And he says, if there's a psul in the Shem Hashem, you have to take out that yiriyah and start again. That you put in Geniza, mechatev et Hashem. Or actually, the Rambam I think doesn't say this, but the Riyaskandani is saying you can cut out the Shem Hashem. That would be another option, to cut out the Shem Hashem that's pasul. K'da'amar Rabbi Yehuda b'hayi braita d'le'el mechatvo v'kotev Yehuda acher. Right. So in the same parak in Masechet Sofrim, I brought it down here in my footnotes. But it says in Masechet Sofrim, it's Perkel Achad Gimel. It says there Hayat Tzarich Chov Yehuda v'nitkaven v'katav et Hashem Tan Bodal and Makvo Kotev Yehuda Acher. If somebody had to write the name, but he made a mistake before he started writing the name Yehuda, he thought he was writing the Shem Havaya. So his kavanah was to write Yud Hey Vav Hey as Shem Hashem. And then after he finishes writing it, he realizes that his kavanah was wrong. He shouldn't have had kavanah to write Shem Hashem. He should have had a kavanah to write Yehuda. Afal pi shenatan bo dalid, even if he hangs a dalid on top of it, in between the vav and the hey, it's pasul, right? Because he wrote a Shem Hashem b'kavanah Shem Hashem, and me'akvo v'kotev Yehuda acher. So me'akvo in Girsa of the Riyas Kandani, it's mechatvo, and it's this same idea. It means that you cut it out. The solution is you cut out that Shem Hashem. So the psul is you wrote a kosher Shem Hashem in a place where there shouldn't be a Shem Hashem. And so we see from Masechet Sofrim, there is a source to say that you don't have to remove the entire, but rather you're allowed to cut it out and then write, the word that you wanted to write, Yehuda, you would write it after the whole. Okay, so Ad Kam Lashon, this is the Sikum of the Riyas Kandarni. So the Riyas Kandarni, in the case where you have a Shem Hashem, where one or the other hain, the leg is touching the roof in such a way that you can see that it looks like a hay, then there's no way to fix that. And the only two options that we've brought so far, either you move the whole yiriyah, you can cut it out. Those are the two options so far. I think we'll stop here. Next week, we'll continue, and you'll see the next thing he talks about is another option, which is an option, the option of kiluf, of peeling it off. We'll talk about kiluf next week. Are there any questions, comments, criticism? Okay, good. I wish yeah.
Sorry, Shel, just one question in terms of timelines. You said that the tour came before the Shulchan Aruch, right? It was the pre.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. Actually, when we finish, I'll send you a link. The very first shiur I gave in this series is an introduction to sources, which will show where it is in the scheme of things. So I'll send you a link. Beseder, listen, happy cheesecake to everybody. Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy your one day of Yom Tov.
I'm completely happy with one day of Yom Tov.
Yeah.
I am too. As my sister said, it's enough to make me not come back to America.
You should, as a fellow said to me many years ago, you have to make aliyah and beat the rush for kibbutz. Except he said that before the fall of the Soviet Union and the Ethiopians. So I think even if you don't beat the rush, you should still come. Tov.
You got my adjustment line.
Laila Tov, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom.